Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. May I request all our guests for today to please take their seats so we can begin today's proceedings. Thank you so much. On behalf of Mr. Raju Ramachandran, his family, and his chamber, I welcome all our guests to today's event. We're particularly delighted to have among us today the families of many of the lawyers who feature in the book. Welcome to all of you. This evening's program has been carefully curated by Raju sir, in consultation with some key advisors, and all of us who know Raju sir, of course, that comes as no surprise. We are all in for a real treat as we celebrate the lives of 14 legal luminaries about whom he writes in his latest book, 14 Lawyers, Portraits from the Bar. But before I speak any further, on express instructions from Raju sir, I must introduce myself. I'm Shibani Ghosh, a practicing lawyer and an honorary member of Raju sir's chamber, having interned with him many, many years ago. My husband Rishad, unlike me, is a card-carrying, full-fledged member of the chamber. He had the occasion of working with sir for 3 years. Over the years, Raju sir's guidance and support has been a constant for us and our family. In the fraught times that we live in, Sir's is a voice that is calm, even understated, but nonetheless independent and unwavering when it really counts. In her middle word in Raju sir's last book, I have been around for some time, Nitya Ramakrishnan ma'am writes, and I quote, "His virtues, too numerous to be counted, are common knowledge. An inveterate amicus curiae, his wisdom and fairness have illuminated many a thorny legal issue. Even-tempered, pleasant, considerate, hospitable, humorous, a friend in need and generous with his praise, Raju is a repository of every amiable quality. He even has the virtue of wearing his virtues lightly." Ma'am goes on to say many more things which will sound better if they come from her rather than me. But in a profession that is often defined by one's mentors, I have been fortunate to have not one, but 2 Ramachandrans in my life looking out for me. Much before I got to know Raju sir, I knew Sadhana ma'am. My sister and I went to the same school as Vibhuti and Chaitanya, their children. We lived in the same neighborhood, and somehow Sadhana ma'am became my go-to person through school, always generous with her time and her advice. It is because of her that I even contemplated a law degree, and it was because of her that I did not think twice before applying and then joining a 1-year-old, relatively unknown law school set up by Professor Madhav Menon in Kolkata then. No doubt, Sadhana ma'am's reassurances meant much to my parents as well. It is a decision that has defined much of who I am today. I remained a grateful beneficiary of Sadhana ma'am's generosity until the very end. Her generosity with her time, her advice, her humor, her gupshup. Ma'am, wherever you are missed. And thank you, Raju sir, for bringing us all today here together for this wonderful occasion. Many of you probably know this is also the centenary year for Sir's father, and he has just completed 50 years in the legal profession. So much to celebrate, sir. Congratulations. And now a little bit about the book. Before I go into its content, not surprisingly, because it's Raju sir's book, there are, of course, reasons why it is the way it looks. Why is it black, white, and red? Apart from the familiar black and white, which all of us as lawyers and judges know, black for Raju sir indicates his sympathy with the Dravidian cause and Black Lives Matter, and red indicates his left inclinations. Which brings us to the book and the luminaries it features. Our distinguished panelists, of course, will speak about them, but for me, two things that really stood out. First, just the accessible way in which he's written them with a light touch. It just keeps the reader engrossed, and the reader does not have to be someone from the legal fraternity. And second, the emergency and the fallout of the emergency finds place in several chapters of the book. And for lawyers of later generations, the book gives a rare, insightful, and lived perspective of a law student and later a young lawyer witnessing those times. And that was really very, very valuable for me. May I now invite Mr. Vineet Gill from Juggernaut to speak about the book. Mr. Gill is executive editor at the Juggernaut Books and the author of Here and Hereafter, a literary biography of the Hindi writer Nirmal Varma, published in 2022.
Hi, hello. Thank you, everyone. Good to see a full house here. So I'm going to be talking about the book from the point of view of an outsider in the world of the law. The question how this book was conceived and how it came to be acquired has been addressed by the author in his preface. He says that he chose not to write a memoir because he found the idea somewhat immodest. He chose not to do a book about a larger legal subject because the prospect of just another generic book on the law he found to be boring. So he settled for this book of profiles featuring 14 extraordinary lawyers who made significant contributions to India's legal history and who deserve to be better known than they are today. But in my experience as a reader, what makes this book truly fascinating, I thought, was it has to do with how it transcends its category, how it becomes something more than a book of profiles. And I'm talking about the glimpses of India's larger legal history that you get here in these pieces, the historic moments that form a backdrop to the profiles. So for instance, there is this, we witnessed the inauguration of the Supreme Court of India in 1950 in the Barry Sain profile. We get to see the early days of the Delhi High Court in the 60s in the Shamla Papu profile. And we see the landmark Kesavanand Bharti hearings before a 13-judge bench in the Temta Nandirujana profile, and so on. And alongside this larger history, we get glimpses of the author's personal history. As a boy from a railway family, as a law student in Delhi, as a junior lawyer, and then a senior advocate. So this book is as much about how this trajectory, this life in the law of Raju Ramachandran was shaped as it is about the other lives recorded here. It's about the diversity of influences absorbed by the author as a young man. And diversity is one of the central themes here. A diverse style, the profiles present diverse styles of advocacy from the mild-mannered Lal Narayan Sinha, the soft-spoken lawyer, and you had to, Mr. Ramachandran says, you had to strain your ears to actually hear what he was trying to say, to the vociferous and combative R.K. Garg. This book, I thought, is also about the meaning of mentorship in personal and professional life, and this is what makes it more relatable for a reader like me, who has nothing much to do with the world of the law. So I believe youngsters will find in these pages inspiration, and older readers will be able to encounter a familiar but lost world of advocacy where substance often triumphed over style. So to conclude, there's something for everyone here, and I'd like to urge all of you to pick up a copy and give this excellent book a read, regardless of whether you're an insider in the world of the law, as a lot of you are, or like me, an outsider. Thanks.
Thank you, Vineet. May I now request our panelists to please join us on the dais. Our final panelists will join us briefly. Raju sir insisted that he'll not be on the dais, and so he wanted all our panelists there today. Today we have a very illustrious panel with us. I'll give very brief introduction of all of them. I think they are all very well known to us, but still. Nitya ma'am, senior advocate who's been practicing criminal and constitutional law at the Supreme Court and Delhi High Court. While waiting for her cases to be called in court, ma'am is seen engrossed in besting her previous record in cracking the Guardian cryptic crossword. Though she practices law, mathematics and cricket are her true passions. Nitya ma'am and Raju sir go back a long way. If her middle word in the book is any indication, we can expect a few candid remarks from ma'am about Raju sir, I hope, this evening. Mr. Pavan Varma sir, former diplomat and parliamentarian, and an author with 26 titles to his credit, and I believe 2 more are in the works. He's also interested in poetry, ghazals, classical music, bird watching. It is thus no wonder that he has reportedly once said that his day does not have 24 hours but 36 hours. Justice Madan Lokur, former judge of the Supreme Court of India, he has been a judge of the Supreme Court of Fiji and is currently the chairperson of the United Nations Internal Justice Council. Reliable sources inform us that Justice Lokur is a fan of Elvis Presley and the Beatles and was once an avid ham radio operator. We are now joined by a final panelist, Mr. Mahmood Farooqui. He's a Delhi-based writer and filmmaker. He's best known for reviving Dastangoi, the once lost art of Urdu storytelling. And our moderator for today's panel, Mr. Prashanto Sen, senior advocate practicing in commercial, regulatory, and public law disputes in the Supreme Court and various high courts and tribunals. He was recently appointed Additional Advocate General for the state of Tamil Nadu. What we do not know about Sir, he's a black belt in Aikido and claims that the practice of Aikido has made him more proficient in his advocacy skills. So clearly we have much to learn from all our seniors in the profession. Well, today's event has 2 parts. The first part is a panel discussion with Nitya ma'am, Pavan Varma sir, and Justice Lokur, which will be moderated by Prashanto sir. And in the second part, Mr. Mahmood Farooqui, the Dastango, will take the podium, read from the book, and discuss its narrative style. Over to you, Prashanto sir.
Thanks a lot, Shivani. It's indeed a pleasure. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and also a privilege. Since time is short, I'm dispensing with the names of the galaxy of eminent personalities here because all of them are people who are living out their values up in their profession. And I can see that from the faces which are here. But the urge to introduce or reach out to some of the eminent personalities also tempered by the fact that Mr. Raju sir, now I'll put a medium, I won't say Raju, nor will I call him Mr. Ramachandran, but Raju sir himself insisted that he'd not be on the panel here, sitting here. I mean, he decided to be on at the back stiles. So, of course, despite my protestation, Shivani has introduced me, and I don't complain about that, and I'm happy to be introduced to this galaxy of eminent personalities. Now, I readily jump to be a moderator here. I'm the least eminent, but yet this gives me control over time, and I can, wax eloquent in my own time and leave the portion out time selectively to others. But we are trying to complete this within a period of 1 hour and about 10 minutes each. All of us would be discussing various personalities in this book. Speaking for myself a bit, I joined the bar in the late 90s, and many of these personalities were people who I vaguely recollect sauntering in the corridors of the Supreme Court. At that time, I didn't realize the significance or the importance or the extent to which they had achieved. And partly because, of course, I was young at that time, slightly wavered in my concentration in law, and therefore not so diligent in finding out about everyone. But it's been a pleasure, a rare pleasure, to read this book and to see these figures come to life and color. It is a very, very unique pleasure to, kind of see them again. And this book brings them alive and gently leads people of my generation to revisit those times, because that was a time when commercialization in the bar was just about beginning in the way it has begun, it has reached now. It had just started with liberalization, etc. And so it is a time when we found that these values were there, certain values which these people espoused were very much there and strong, and it enables us to revisit them and kind of look at them in contemporary times and see where we stand. As far as the people who have been selected in this book, it is a very sophisticated selection. Of course, Justice Nariman in his foreword divides them sharply into seamen and gentlemen. And seamen, he says, are people who are able to strongly put forward their case and make their point in loud voices. And the gentlemen are those who don't have those characteristics. So he divides them into two. But there is a golden thread running through these personalities. They are people who had courage of their convictions, and they went ahead and said what they had to without worrying about the consequences. That is a very, very important aspect which runs through these lawyers who are here. Also, it gives a reflection of the author's personality to be able to select them and to be able to call them as his heroes who he wants to introduce to the present generation. What can the present generation really learn from these people? It's an era of glitzy commercialization, a lot of self-promotion which is there, there's intense competition which is there, there is distraction with the cell phones which is there. So I think what it helps us do is to redirect and re-anchor ourselves on the work itself and say, if our work is good, it will be a vehicle of eminence and progress in this profession, and that's the best way to do it. As Jaideep, Dipankar Gupta, Jaideep, his son, pointed out, doing well before a judge or a court itself is enough to take you very high in your profession. You don't need the kind of commercialization and advertisement which is today's genre. But having said that, most importantly, one last thing, is the importance of observing the courts and being in the courts. And that's something which comes out from Raju sir's book. A lot of the personalities he talks about are people who he noticed first in the Keshavanand Bharti case while they were being argued. Today we see juniors looking at their cell phones. It's natural to be distracted by it, but it is important to understand the court, and the only way to do it is unfailingly every day be in court and observe the court. With that, I'll straight away turn to Justice Lokur, and having exercised my privilege to initiate and take over the time, I would like to turn to him to know his impression of the book, and if he could in particular dwell on V.M. Tarkunde, who he knew personally, as I understand, and also since he was a law officer, Justice Lokur, for a considerable period of time, I would request, if possible, to also touch upon some of the lawyers here who are mentioned, who were eminent law officers, Solicitor Generals Mr. Lal Narayan Sinha, Mr. Kakkar, and Mr. T. Andhyarujina. Over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Prashanto. I didn't know you were a black belt. So, yeah, so I mean, whatever you say, I have to do it. Yeah, but, you know, about the book, when Raju told me that he'd written this book and he wanted me to, you know, speak about some of the persons, some of the personalities in this book, I thought, let me just, skim through it and see what it's all about. I had no idea that, this was, profiles of 14 eminent lawyers. But when I started flipping through the book, and going through a couple of these personalities in whom I was interested, I just couldn't stop reading it. I knew everybody, in the sense that I had met everybody, except Mr. Swaminathan. But I just couldn't stop reading about the various persons that he has dealt with in the book. And I sent a message to Raju immediately saying that this is unstoppable. So I think it's definitely worth a read, even if you're not connected with the law. You must read about these really eminent personalities who graced the Supreme Court, who graced the bar for many years. Coming to the persons that you had mentioned, Justice Tarkunde, he was popularly known as Bhau, which is brother in Marathi. And that indicates, his personality, very approachable, more like somebody from the family, and a person who was fully committed to the law. He joined the profession at a little later stage, but fully committed to the law, fully committed to principles, which he had followed. And I remember an incident when the Chief Justice of India at that time, Justice A.N. Ray, he had superseded 3 judges during the emergency to become the Chief Justice of India. And as lawyers, many of us, were very perturbed about it, didn't think it was a good idea. Justice Tarkunde appeared before him in a couple of occasions, but he spoke publicly to say that the supersession was wrong and that he was completely against it. Justice Ray obviously came to know about Justice Tarkunde's views, and he was kind of rude to him in court. And Justice Tarkunde, not a person to take, to all this very kindly, decided, and again publicly announced, that he is not going to appear in his court at all. And as long as Chief Justice Ray was the Chief Justice of India, he did not appear before him at all. That shows the fact that, he was a person of great integrity, a person of, principles, which he followed. It's rare. I don't think I've come across any other person who has had the courage to say that he's not going to appear before a particular judge because that judge is either rude or is biased or whatever. Yeah, I've known Justice Tarkunde for many, many years, and I've always admired him. And he was a great person, a radical humanist, and somebody who I think many of us who knew him, respect him and admire him. So far as Mr. Kakkar is concerned, I did meet him a couple of times, Mr. S.N. Kakkar, but I first heard of him when I was in school. I finished my school from Allahabad, and my father was a judge in the Allahabad High Court, and I remember his, mentioning on a couple of occasions about 3 very eminent lawyers in the Allahabad High Court. One was Shanti Bhushan, one was Kanhaiyalal Mishra, and the other was Mr. S.N. Kakkar. These names kind of stuck in my mind. I was in school, I had no intention of becoming a lawyer or any such thing, but these names stuck in my mind. And it was really a pleasure to see Mr. Kakkar appear in court. Soft-spoken, but extremely hardworking. They say that a lawyer should know the brief from the first page to the last page. Mr. Kakkar epitomized that. He indulged intended or wanted to be the Attorney General for India. As Raju points out, there was a quirk of fate. Justice H.R. Khanna was the law minister for 2 days or maybe 3 days in the Charan Singh government, and a lot of people said, what are you doing becoming the law minister in a government of defectors? So Justice H.R. Khanna resigned. Mr. S.N. Kakkar was to be the Attorney General, but because the law minister resigned, he became the law minister. So he never eventually got to be the Attorney General, which I think is a pity for the bar. Lal Narayan Sinha, again popularly known as Lal Babu. Right? I don't think many people would know him other than as Lal Babu. Again, a very, very simple person, but firm in his convictions, firm in whatever he did, and very, very, very. The word used actually is wily. I'm not sure whether that's a complimentary word, but lawyers would say that the person to be afraid of is Lal Babu. Why? Because he's wily and you don't know what kind of an argument he's going to come up with, which is definitely going to convince the judges, so better be careful, right? But I do remember about the firmness of Lal Babu. There was an occasion before Justice Bhagwati when he was sitting in court number 2, and Justice Bhagwati was an activist judge who wanted to get things moving. And there was a case before him, I don't remember what the case was about, and he was pretty upset at the fact that, law and order was, falling apart, so to speak, and the government was doing nothing about it. And he went on and said, what's happening, look at the law and order situation, this, that, and the other, and there has to be a solution, and so on and so forth. And Lal Babu tried to tell him, that let's stick to the case, and I'll tell you what the problem is and what we can do about it. But Justice Bhagwati would not listen to him. So Lal Babu kind of got, a little upset. And he said, I think the best solution to this for your lordship to do is to pass an order to say that henceforth there will be no crime in the country. Right? And Justice Bhagwati got the message and kind of calmed down and heard the case as it is. So that was, Lal Babu's style of, putting his point across firmly, politely, but to get the point across. You wanted me to? Tempton, yeah, he was a great person. I've had a couple of discussions with him. Unfortunately, we didn't agree, but we did have quite a few discussions. One was about reforms in the justice system. He at some dinner or something, he came up to me and he said, I know that you are interested in reforms in the justice delivery system. I want to ask you your views. So I told him what my views was, and he said, listen, I don't think I agree with what you're saying, but anyway, let me hear you out. He heard me out, gave me his point of view. I didn't agree with what he said, but we had this discussion not once, but I think a couple of times. But we never reached a conclusion. We didn't know. He didn't agree with the solutions that I had for judicial reforms. I didn't agree with the solutions that he had. The other thing that we had discussed was about public interest litigation. Tempton Andhyarujina, sorry, I feel like calling him Tempton because that's how I knew him. Wonderful person, wonderful person. He was not particularly thrilled with the idea of public interest litigation. And he had his views. I'm a great votary of public interest litigation. So again, we had discussions, right? He said, this is what is wrong with public interest litigation. And I would say this is what is right with public interest litigation. Again, we didn't agree how to proceed on public interest litigation. But all three persons, all four persons actually, Justice Tarkunde, Mr. S.N. Kakkar, Lal Babu, and of course Thempton, outstanding persons whom you would look up to, as lawyers. I know that on a couple of occasions, when I was there in the corridors of the Supreme Court, somebody would say that Lal Babu is arguing in that court or Thempton is arguing in that court. And the idea was to just go there and sit down and listen to them, right? Because they had this court craft, they had this ability to put a point across in several different ways and somehow or the other convince the judges of what they were trying to canvass. So really, thank you, Raju, for bringing them back to life in such a wonderful way. Thanks a lot.
Mr. Pavan Varma, coming next to you, of course, we'd like your impression of the book, but keeping your background in particular, we'd be very much interested in your impressions of Frank Anthony, who was in public life as you are, and Barry Sen. He was a big figure in international law, and much before Shashi Tharoor, in fact. He was in consideration for the UN Secretary Generalship. So some thoughts on that. Certainly, please.
Good evening to this very distinguished audience whose collective sense of law could probably rewrite the Constitution better than any attempts being made so far. Let me say what a great pleasure it is to be here and be present at the launch of a very old friend, class fellow of mine in law. But when the author, since he is now universally known as Raju Sir, when Raju Sir is not part of the panel, it can mean one of two things. Either he has something to hide or nothing more to say. I think both propositions are wrong. He has nothing to hide and he has always something more to say. But I would have very much liked you to be present. There is no point in being grilled in absentia. However, we are not going to grill you because I have only praise for this book. And I want to say that I want to congratulate Raju for 50 years in the profession. We were class fellows in college, later law faculty. Raju was the serious student. And in my final year of law, I had 7% attendance. And I spent the evening before the exams began trying to somehow get an admit card through some excessively persuasive logic with the clerk. And later the results came out. I was sitting in the Law Fac Cafe when someone informed me that I have stood third in the university. So with the misplaced hubris of youth, which never really leaves you, I turned around and asked, who are the first two? And the first was Raju Ramachandran, if I'm not wrong, or Mohan Gopal was second. And then I was third. And after reading this book, I realized that in this very distinguished panel of legal minds, I am an intruder, but this is the serendipity of destiny. I could have been an insider and probably made much more money. I did law only for the express purpose after doing history at St. Stephen's to possibly practice law. And the reason for that was that it's a bit of obiter dicta, but it's important to explain my link with Raju and with Madan, Justice Lokur, because my whole family, my grandfather was the first Indian Chief Justice of UP. His son was the Chief Justice. My uncles and cousins were all leading lawyers or high court judges, and this is in Allahabad. And so my thought was that I would continue with that profession. Only my father joined the government, the ICS, but the rest of the family was literally, everyone was in law. And I did law, but that is where our paths parted, because I then joined the Foreign Service and they went on to have a very distinguished career in the legal profession. I still have my law degree, and somebody advised me the other day that if Raju sir will make me his junior, I could do a case or two a month. In fact, we are talking of what has happened 50 years hence, but about 70 years or more earlier, Justice Lokur and I went to a preschool together, which, if you will, we were neighbors in Rabindranagar. And if you will forgive, the name of the play school, it was a secret so far between us, was Kumkum Play School, where we went to school, to play school together, and then, of course, later in life. What I really enjoyed about this book, Raju, was that it has a certain irresistible nostalgia about the grandeur of the legal profession, as it once was. Where there was a great deal of elegance, there was eloquence, there was cerebration, there was refinement, there were the quirks which are a natural accessory of good minds, and the courage of conviction which Prashanto spoke about, and a great deal of meticulous hard work. And there were, if I may say so, a much larger amount of ethics. And that is the nostalgia that attracted me to this book as I went through its pages, because I think one of the best ways to profile that period of law is to profile 14 of its eminent lawyers. Just a telling of that period would not so much bring it alive as a telling it through the lives of people who lived it. And that, I think, was the great readability of this book, because it also introduces what law, which has again become fashionable after having, when I joined the law fac, I'm sorry, I'll take only 30 seconds to say this, my original certificates and degrees were not released to me by the all-powerful Robert Saab of St. Stephen's College when he heard that I'm joining the law faculty. Because that was usually the place where anybody went who didn't get admission, and I had done rather well. I had topped St. Stephen's. But so he held it back for 48 hours and I still joined law. But now law has come up again. But for the ordinary person, what this book does, and for the ordinary person, incidentally, let's be frank, law is somehow an opaque area of incomprehensible legal jargon, hair-splitting, endless argumentation, inordinate delays, and of course, unacceptably rich lawyers. And for the ordinary person to comprehend what law still is in many ways, and what it is evolving to become even more if we have such good minds joining it. My son has gone back, I'm not saying good mind or bad, but he has gone back to the legal profession like the rest of my family, Vedant. But the point I'm trying to say is that there is today a need for the outside world to understand what law is, apart from either being afraid about getting entangled in the process of law. In other words, to get a judgment in your favor and all that it entails, even if you are convinced that you are in the right. It's an endlessly Kafkaesque nightmare for a lot of people. I'm sorry I'm saying this to this audience, but that is precisely true. Adjournments, dates after dates, and so on and so forth. So for such people, it is a book which brings alive what law once was and what potentially probably it is today and what could certainly become. And now about the two people you asked me, I can talk about them because I didn't know them. I didn't know, naturally, the legend, Mr. Frank Antony. But after reading this book, and of course through my own earlier knowledge, I realized that he made a very significant contribution in the initial phase of our parliamentary history. And that too with a very busy law practice on the side. And I don't think it was because he was there on a quota from the Anglo-Indian community. He was a very good mind, and he had very definitive views on subjects and the courage of conviction to stand by them and argue for them in Parliament, sometimes even at the cost of perhaps faster elevation to a higher post within Parliament or outside. And he was a great educationist. Now, it's difficult to find people who can do all of this as part of one life in one career and do it so successfully, and his stand on the rights of minorities institutions in terms of their own education. And I suspect that even then he may have faced opposition for some of these. I don't agree with him necessarily on his views on the language policy in Parliament, but I understand the utility of English. And he was therefore speaking from the point of the overall good of the country. And that is important because last I remember when I was in Parliament, to have a sensible debate was almost as impossible as to have a clean administration. I mean, there is no scope for debate. Actually, the central hall where you get exceptionally subsidized coffee is really the only place where you have a discussion. Because the rest of the time the house is adjourned. Or, I mean, in its entire history, the House of Commons has not been adjourned for a single day. And we are now soon going to equal it because there is not a single day when the Indian Parliament is not adjourned. So in such a situation, to have a period, to have an eminent lawyer, a good man, taking up issues which he felt were important for the evolution of this country as a vibrant and viable democracy, that is a tribute to a great man, and many of them he's remembered now not only for this contribution, but for his schools that he set up. Barry Sen, I cannot for the life of me understand how a lawyer got so much inside the Ministry of External Affairs. As it is, it's a fairly close tribe that resents intrusion. But he was for 10 years the honorary legal advisor to the Ministry of External Affairs, and I'm sure it was performing much better as a result of his advice. There were contentious issues. India was still establishing in that formative stage its presence with clarity on a great number of issues that mattered internationally. And people wanted to know where India stood, not in terms of the emotional resonance of its past, or necessarily because of the non-aligned movement, but on critical issues on points of fact and law. And that is what I think Barry Sen contributed to. He was also involved with the Afro-Asian Legal Consultative Committee, and having served in our mission to the UN in New York, the UN too is a peculiarly indescribable tribe. And for that, an Indian to make a mark in the days when it was actually superpower equations that led to a decision on your merits for a particular job rather than your intrinsic merit. And that is why he lost out from the race for the UN Secretary General also. because it was a convenient condominium between those who controlled who became what in their best interest rather than in the best interests of the institution. And that is not a small reason to understand why the UN has become such a passive bystander to international affairs. Because it is essentially the P5 that controls the UN, will not allow for its democratization, and therefore people of merit like, and he was disappointed. I saw from Raju's book that he was disappointed when he came so close to it and yet did not make it, but it would have made history. And I think it would have been a very good choice. And he wrote a book, a diplomat's handbook of international law and practice, which perhaps may have been read because perhaps in those days not every decision was made in the PMO irrespective of the law. So, essential point I'm making is that it was a system still evolving, and I'm not talking of this PMO or that. In due course over the recent past, that is the situation. But in those days, there was a certain porousness and openness to advice that came objectively from the right source for the right reason. So I greatly enjoyed, Raju sir, the reading of this book. I want to congratulate you and to say how happy I am. And I want to pay, in the end, a special tribute to Sadhana. Raju's wife Sadhana was a very dear friend of both Renu and mine, and a wonderful human being, a fine human being, really. There are very few people I have met where sincerity is so transparent. Guile is so completely absent. The desire to help, to guide, to mentor, to contribute to someone else's cause is so strong. And that was Sadhana. She left us too early. But she was truly a great woman, and she would have been so happy on this occasion. Thank you so much.
Certainly, sir.
I just wanted to add a small sentence about Frank Anthony, which I think you missed out. Frank Anthony was responsible for Raju getting the name of Raju.
Yes.
Why hold it against him?
Thank you, Mr. Varma. And if anything, this audience, as you said, would be best equipped to rewrite the Constitution. If anything, this audience here is best equipped to defend the Constitution and maintain it. I think from the kind of audience which is here, that is number one. Second, I think you very presciently, despite being a so-called outsider, although a topper in, almost a third ranker in CLC, I'm sorry, I just about made it to the first class or slightly below perhaps. But CLC is this, you're right, that the elegance and the meticulousness of the preparation earlier, which as Justice Lokur pointed out, made it a pleasure to go and witness arguments which were taking place. And I think that came because I think that generation believed or maybe drew joy from the very process itself. So it's much like a test cricket which you would go and watch as opposed to a T20 now. And even in a T20 now, the money is far more than it was at that time. Now coming straight to Nitya, I'd like to turn to you and also, of course, your general observations about the book. But keeping in mind the fact that you started your work with Mr. M.K. Ramamurthy and your long engagement with civil liberties, I would very much like you to touch upon Mr. M.K. Ramamurthy, of course, Shamala Pappu, R.K. Garg, and Govind Mukhoti. Thank you.
Thanks, Prashanto. Raju. Now, those of you who know Raju well would know, and those of you who may not know him all that well should know, that among his very many talents and abilities is the talent to speak English in many Indian languages. He routinely speaks English to me in Tamil, failing that in Punjabi. In fact, Rajiv Datta is sitting here and he would also know this. But for all that, his English in English is very good. His prose is apt and optimal. In fact, these sketches are so readably brief. There's absolutely no doubt about his excellence in English prose. I regret, however, to say, in matters of poetry, at least of late, his friends have been watching with growing consternation that he is turning to some poets who shall not be named and, in my opinion, should not be read. And not only has he taken to quoting from them and messaging us daily from those sources, but he is bidding fair to emulating them and their style. So, with friendly intent, to give his mind a proper direction and to give him a better example to emulate, I have got for him a gift. This is the verse, delightful verse of Ogden Nash. Raju, please come and receive it. Come and receive it. I'm so proud of you. It is, of course, also to celebrate this achievement, to celebrate his 50 years in practice, and to celebrate Raju himself. That done, we can return to his excellent prose. The book is dedicated to his parents, but I sense some of sadhana in it, in that the words of dedication he has chosen are the words R.L. Stevenson used as homage to his wife Fanny in that unpublished masterpiece, Weir of Hermiston. Shivani mentioned my interest in cricket. So I'd like to begin with some words John Arlott wrote for the great master, Jack Hobbs. Perhaps many would say the greatest. The words are these: numbers fail you, for they can never say. How many men whose names you never knew will proudly tell their sons they saw you play? So this book is an account by the author of the heroes he saw in play, and therein lies its richness. He talks of their achievements, he talks of milestones, but also he speaks of other anecdotes in their lives, and he speaks of their various foibles. So with grace and wit and humor, he treads that middle ground between adulation and animadversion. He does it beautifully. Coming to the book and to the lawyers you mentioned, Prashanto. Madan, you will bear me out if I say that barely 5 years into independence, the Indian Supreme Court had disappointed on the subject of personal liberty in the A.K. Gopalan case. Notable instances where fundamental rights were protected from intrusion from the state, executive, or parliament happened to be cases involving private property. Scholars have written that in the few decades after independence, state expediency trumped personal liberty, but private interest and private property trumped state interest. Into that kind of a milieu, in the 60s, came a gang of four called Ramamurthy and Company. Left-leaning and deeply concerned about the underdog. Through their advocacy, they brought into being the labor and service jurisprudence of this country. In fact, I believe that the strides made in social justice by the judiciary in the later years arose largely because of the sensitization to the cause of the underdog, which was wrought by this team. And Raju profiles two leading figures of this quartet, R.K. Garg and M.K. Ramamurthy. I remember R.K. Garg as a man of great personal charm. He had a very sweet smile, and he had very bright eyes. Raju writes of his formidable intellect, of his membership of and expulsion from the Communist Party of India, about how he passed away even while he was arguing the Ayodhya reference because he was traveling to attend a meeting on secularism and he died in a road accident. In fact, in these really disturbed days when secularism is under threat, you miss a man like R.K. Garg. Raju also writes about Garg's support for the emergency and in fact his support for the supersession of judges. Of the many cases of Garg that he mentions, I will speak of two notable ones, but I'll first mention a case that Raju does not mention, which I think is significant. That is Fertilizer Kamdar Union versus Sindri Fertilizers Company, where Garg was arguing on behalf of the workmen against the sale of machinery by a company, saying that this would throw them out of their jobs eventually. The Supreme Court did not rule in his favor, but went on to make very, very important observations about the right of the workmen to be informed about management policy and also raise issues in appropriate fora. And I think that was a precursor not only to the decision which came 4 years later, where the workers' right to be heard in their own right in a winding up petition was held by the Supreme Court, which is also a case that Raju does not mention either in Ramamurthy's profile or in Garg's profile. But the Sindri fertilizer also gave the basis later for the right to information. So I think that that was a significant case. The other two was Garg's advocacy against the law of obscenity, which he lost, but those arguments still illuminate our arguments for freedom of expression and creative freedom. And his bearer bonds case, which recalls to Raju quite rightly the recent electoral bonds case which the Supreme Court struck down. And Garg told me that some causes were actually won in the fight rather than in the verdict. And he said, after my arguments, I don't think anybody will be able to bring back this bearer bond scheme. Well, to the extent that when they did bring back something similar, it was struck down. I think he's vindicated. When I asked Garg once indignantly why he supported the emergency, he said very simply that he believed that Indira Gandhi was the only answer to American imperialism. So leaving you all to ponder over those thoughts in these times, I come to Shyamala Pappu, the incomparable Shyamala Pappu. She really stood alone. Raju writes about how she stormed every male bastion in the field of law. She asked for no quarter, she got none. Aside from her brilliance as a lawyer, she was an incredibly talented person. In fact, she was formally trained both in Carnatic classical music and in Hindustani classical music, and I have a very vivid memory. I was privileged to be a recipient both of her affection and of her disapproval. And I remember like it was yesterday, her singing the Arohanam Avarohanam of Hamsadhwani and Mohanam or Bhopali, explaining why a single note made such a difference to the manner and mode. There, I can see CSP nodding his head. she was a great cook. In fact, she was such an accomplished person. She was one of those super women who could look after home, look after the world, deal with everything, and so on. And her disdain for those of her sex who were less endowed was thinly veiled. Raju writes of the steps she took to make laws more gender just, to especially in the fields of personal law, divorce, custody, and so on. My own sense is that her crusades were both more personal and professional rather than ideological. I was not able to see any, say, doctrinaire feminist stance in her. At least I was unable to discern any. Govinda Mukhoti was a lovely, lovely man. I knew him from much before I joined the bar. As a schoolgirl, a friend of mine and I would try and sneak into the Citizens for Democracy meetings and POCL meetings during the emergency. He always had a kind word for us. This very yellow Citroen that Raju speaks of used to give us a lift. And I remember also the bitter fight within the POCL, which led to the split, of which also Raju writes. He had a booming voice, and what Raju says about R.K. Garg, I remember better of Mukhoti, that he would put one foot on the chair behind, and after making a point, he'd turn around in his booming, making a point in his booming voice, he would turn around and look at the assembled courtroom as if to say, so there. I remember that. Raju says that Garg did some of this, but I remember this more of Mukhoti. And of course, he was very Brit, but not all that Britness could hide the Bengali in him, or the manner in which he spoke. Raju mentions his very important cases, Bandhua Bhukti Morcha, and also the Hoshangabad firing case. But Raju doesn't mention that the case dearest to his heart was what he was fighting when we lost him. That is the challenge to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, which later Kapil Sibal argued. And unsurprisingly, the Supreme Court upheld that law with the pious hope that it would not be abused. But there is an account of Govinda Mukhoti's life. He was a civil liberties activist, very, well-regarded civil liberties activist. An account of his life would be incomplete without mentioning one incident. He appeared for two policemen, not only accused but convicted by two courts of custodial rape. The Supreme Court upheld the conviction but reduced the sentence to a sub-minimum from 10 years to 5. Naturally, this led to a furore in the civil liberties circles. But Mukhoti was intrepid in the face of the state, and he remained fearless in the face of his own. M.K. Ramamurthy, there's a lot of emotion in Raju's chapter, and I would leave that chapter to the reader, except to mention a few memories of my own. He was only 16 when he was arrested in the Quit India movement. He was not in his late teens, but actually mid-teens. He was in the Alipuram jail, and that's where he and my father and a group of people became close friends. And that band of friends and their friendship, I have never seen the equal of it, or that loyalty. They went their different ways. Some of them became leftists, some were socialists, some were congressmen. But that kind of loyalty which lasted until their deaths, I have not seen friendship like that. Raju mentions his environment cases, but one very important case, which I think should be spoken of in detail, is how he originally appeared and got a stay on limestone quarrying in Dehradun, and later it got a complete ban on quarrying. As a result, the quarry owners were baying for his blood, and he went in real threat of life and limb for many years. He would take on pro bono work and sometimes wait out the whole day for a single pro bono case without a complaint. It was a remarkable, remarkable quality. And Raju, of course, writes about how he refused to appear for the management against the worker. He had a very good ear for music. He was a keen gardener. He was very keen on Tamil Ishai. You see, the great trinity of Carnatic music, only snobbishly sang in Sanskrit or compositions in Telugu. So a movement started for songs in Tamil set to Carnatic music, and leaders like Kalki were all at the forefront of it. And Ramamurthy loved Tamil Ishai. In particular, he liked Madurai Mani Iyer and the song Yeppo Varuvaro he was very fond of. And Raju, perhaps when you have that function for your father, you could ask her to sing that song if she can. He was very keen. He loved P.G. Woodhouse. In particular, he liked Ukridge. He had a short temper, yes, but Raju mentions that he took pleasure in small things. You know, I think all of us would have read that expression in novels or somewhere about how somebody shook with silent laughter. I've never seen it exemplified like I've seen it in him. You know, his eyes would crinkle, his shoulders would shake, his whole body would shake, but you could not hear a word. He all shook with silent laughter. You should read that chapter. I think, Raju, I think I'll stop now, Prashanto. But thank you for writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nitya, for that very beautifully portraiture of all these people and very emotional. I really envy that you knew them so well, and I wish I would have been able to, know all these personalities well. Left to me now are Mr. Dipankar Gupta and Nirmal and Kapila Hingorani and Govind Swaminathan, who are again, unfortunately, I didn't know them. I did see, as far as Dipankar and Nirmala and Kapila are concerned, Dipankar Gupta I did see in the corridors. Now, I leave the chapter to you to read, which I'm sure all of you, as you take on the book, you do it. I was lucky enough that I know Jaideep, who's sitting here, his son, eminent senior. And I decided to ferret out some additional information which perhaps is not there in the book and which maybe I could kind of share with the audience. The first thing is that he was born in Ranchi. And because his mother was based in Ranchi, and therefore Ranchi was his great weakness. Anyone who came from Ranchi and wanted a case to be done in Ranchi, he would not refuse. And in fact, Jaideep informs me, perhaps amongst his last cases was a case in Ranchi where he went, and there was Justice Anando Sen, then of course a briefing advocate, who went with him, and now he's the judge of the Calcutta High Court. And of course, when he passed away, the full court reference was from two high courts. One was from the Ranchi High Court, the second was from the Calcutta High Court, and of course, the Supreme Court. The second nugget which brings out his character is the case where he was arguing against a PIL, Sachidanand Pandey case, which was against the establishment of the Taj Bengal, iconic Taj Bengal, at the site where it is now. Of course, that Sachidanand Pandey case it was a very strange case where apparently Sachidanand, who was otherwise a rustic fellow, would be seen carrying Oberoi matchboxes with him. And so that could not have been as innocent a case as it was. But anyway, it was the first case, amongst the first case, I think the first case which dealt with limited tenders, and it was upheld. Now, considering that I'm a product of this generation, my finely tuned commercial instinct asked that I hope they gave him a free lifetime, facilities in the hotel at all. So Jaideep said that in fact, when his marriage was to take place at the hotel, they offered to pay for the entire wedding. And true to his form, he refused. And he said that, no, you've paid my fees for the case. I don't think you owe me anything more than that, a quarter more than that. And that was, that was kind of, I was expecting that would be the answer, and I was glad it was. The second aspects of self-restraint were that he refused the additional Solicitor Generalship of India twice. He was a very favorite of Siddharth Shankar Ray. And just after Fali Nariman resigned, he had been, of course, this is of course in the book also, just after Fali Nariman resigned, he was offered the ASG-ship and he refused. And it was a wise decision. The second time he was offered was when the Janta government was in place. And at that time, again he refused taking it up. Of course, his great contribution was during the, one of the important was his prescience in understanding that the undertaking for the Babri Masjid, in the Babri Masjid case, would not be fulfilled. And he had warned the court against it. I mean, that was one of his, that in the course of his arguments which he was putting forward. Of course, the important thing which comes out again is that he was one of what is called the gentleman of the bar. Very soft-spoken, but of course highly erudite and being able to make his points strongly. Now, as far as Nirmala and Kapila Hingorani are concerned, again I remember Kapila Hingorani in the corridors, a vague recollection of her, didn't understand the involvement, the extent of her involvement to public interest litigation. Of course, the couple is dealt with in this book, in which very endearingly it is described how Mrs. Daftari arranged, used to have a lot of tea parties, arranged a meeting, kind of engineered a kind of partnership between them. And it became a very rich partnership which really contributed a lot to jurisprudence, I think, including three eminent lawyers here, which is Aman and Priya and Shweta. Aman and Priya are both senior advocates here, and Shweta. And in fact, again, when I met Aman just now outside and I was asking him what did he feel, anything else which is there, he said, again, something which comes out in Raju's book. He said that she would encourage the young lot to be in court and be like a vacuum which absorbs exactly all what is going on in court, which today is kind of greatly fuzzied by the cell phones which are there. But coming, say, to the public interest litigations, the very famous case, Husainara Khatun case, which again was, as she said, an emotional response to the kind of atrocities which were going on. And ultimately it led to 40,000 prisoners being released. She also dealt with the Bhagalpur blinding case, seeking not just investigation but compensation and care for the victims which are there. And Nirmal, with her, was described by Raju as one of the strong and silent men, gentle and soft-spoken in his advocacy, but he was a true feminist, as they say, I mean, as he puts it. When Bhagwati invited Kapila to for seniorship, for designation of seniorship, she resisted saying that she did not want the distinction unless her husband was also made a senior advocate, because he had contributed and conceptualized and drafted the main petitions in the PIL. Nirmal Hingorani, of course, much later in his career was designated as a senior through Justice A.S. Anand. Coming to Gobind Swaminathan, unlike Kapila and Dipankar, who I saw briefly in the courts, I never saw him. But my connection runs much deeper. There's a superficial connection, which is as a law officer, as AAG of Tamil Nadu. He was the law officer as Advocate General of Tamil Nadu. But I'll come to a more deeper connection. In the meantime, I managed to meet his grandson, Santanam Swaminathan. And I was asking him about what kind, because he spent the last decade of his life, Govind Swaminathan's life, Santanam was very much there. As described in the book, he went to England at the age of 12, was highly westernized, and he came back. But then in the book, what is also described is his abstemious lifestyle. He would not have an AC. He would, I think, sleep on the floor, if my memory serves correct from the book. And you're shaking. Is it in disagreement or is it? She's the one that's the source of the No, didn't sleep on the floor. Okay, well, I think Santanam is prone to a little bit of exaggeration, which I can excuse. But abstemiousness was there. And in fact, as Santhanam points out, that until his shoes really wore off and someone told him that he needs to buy them, he would go ahead and perhaps do it. And I asked him, what is it? Is it some kind of a spiritual wellspring from which it came? He said, no, it came naturally to him. And he came back from a very westernized training, but coming back to a country which was, with the kind of poverty, etc., he felt that the lifestyle should be minimalist. He was, of course, fond of his riding, which is there, and he was fond of reading extensively. And what was unusual about him is the work-life balance, as they put it, because he would work within the four corners of the of the court hectically during that time. But once he was back, it would be switch off, and it would be reading novels, or it would be meeting people or discussing. And he said he would discourage anyone else from his family perhaps joining law, because he presciently kind of foresaw that it would lead to so much, there would be perhaps so much competition, etc., that it would take things askew. One thing which was perhaps two things futuristic about him which one notices, which is there in the book. One is that he would often, in the Royappa case, it's described that he would call the juniors at 7 a.m. He would have taped his argument, which he would have perhaps spoken out. It would be put out before the juniors, and then they would be told to kind of point out the flaws, anything else they want to add, etc., and how was the presentation, etc., which was quite amazing. And recently, when I was talking to Justice Nageshwar Rao, and he led me into this point that many of these cases, you have these international arbitrations and court preparations going on. They do exactly the same thing. I mean, of course, there are far fewer cases, unlike us. But this preparation is so intense and thorough that they, in fact, have juries, kind of mock presentations made before retired judges or arbitrators and to point out flaws. So here was Govind Swaminathan, and as K. Parasran pointed out, there was brevity in his argument, but it could be cutting and it could be devastating. He was, the deeper connection which I come to is that I was asking Santhanam, who amongst the lawyers there kind of imbibed the most out of him, and it was Arima Sundaram. And I happened to be a junior of Arima Sundaram. So I was lucky in one way. My connection remains deepest with him, because I've worked in Arima's chambers, and I've seen how he functions. He cuts off at a certain time, but he's deadly serious about the law at the time when he's in the courts. So I'm privileged about that, and with that I think I will now come to the final part of this session, which is to ask my good friend Mahmood Farooqui, also a famed Dastan Goi, who rediscovered the art of Dastan Goi. Yes, and even Jagannath would be in fact releasing his book also, Tihar Plays, in 3 days. And of course we requested him to do a bit of a modulation. His book is about to come out in 3 days, but what we requested is a kind of a modulation, reading of the book and a take on the book in a narrative style. Mahmood, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'll start with a passage from the book. This is Govind Swaminathan. So he was from Madras, and he was getting married in Lahore, and his niece Subhashini Ali has told a couple of stories. It's too good a story not to tell here. So apparently Govind went to Lahore for the nuptials, accompanied only by his sister Lakshmi, Captain Lakshmi Sehgal, famously her mother of the Indian National Army, and his brother Subbaram. His father-in-law-to-be, K. Sanatanam, was an important person in Lahore. When he welcomed them at the railway station, he was appalled to find that there was no barat. This, she says, was unacceptable to him. It would have robbed his eldest daughter's marriage of much of its pomp and circumstance. So he proceeded to round up every Madrasi that he could find in Lahore, typists, accountants, clerks, petty officers, to constitute a barat. This was the beginning of a wedding that had several hilarious moments. While my uncle Govind, this is Subhashini speaking, was much of a prankster with a very English public school boy sense of humor, one incident to which he contributed owed nothing to this trait, while another owed everything. As the Barat entered the marriage venue, the band struck up the Merry Widow Waltz. No one really caught the irony, but my uncle boomed to his prospective father-in-law, rather premature, don't you think? After the ceremonies were over and everyone had enjoyed a magnificent repast covering many cuisines, my father-in-law turned solicitously to Govind and asked, "Is there anything else you would like?" In the dead of the winter in Lahore, my uncle replied, quite innocently, "I would love a banana, actually." This is another incident about Govind. His junior, Sriram Panchu, well-known senior counsel then, was his junior. So he wrote a brief for Govind, and he showed it to him, and Govind took one look at it and said, "If a cat dips its claws in a bottle of ink and walks across a page, that will make more sense than this bloody fellow's writing." After he had worked with him for a month or two, Govind gave him a check for 500 rupees. Sriram says he was quite stunned because he had heard many stories about impecunious juniors and parsimonious seniors. "I don't deserve this," he remonstrated. Govind said, "What makes you think I'm giving this to you because you deserve it? Who I else? Because when you write your memoirs, I don't want you to say that you worked for that Govind Swaminathan who didn't pay you a penny." This is Govinda Mukherjee. Fali Nariman remembering him. He would sit in the library roundly and loudly swearing at Chief Justice Ray, confident that whatever he said in the bar library did not constitute contempt. Others remained tight-lipped. They were not so sure. Walls had ears. Judges of the Supreme Court used to sit at 10:30 a.m. sharp, and old-timers like MC Sitalwad and MC Chagla spoke of how you could set your watch by the time they walked into the court. But there was one occasion when all the courts sat late. A rumor spread that the judges were attending some function. When Justice O. Chennappa Reddy walked into court number 3 with his colleague, I don't remember who it was, at 11:30 a.m., he had to face Govinda Mukherjee, who was waiting for the first case. As the court master called out his case, Mukherjee started with a preface. "My lords, before I start, I wish to make one thing clear. When the court sits late, the bar expects the courtesy of being informed." A sheepish Chinnappa Reddy said, "You are right, Mr. Mukherjee. That is exactly what I told the Chief Justice before we came in, that we should have informed the bar." There is many passages to read. I will return to them later if I have time left. In How to Be God, the British-Hungarian humorist George Mikes, commenting on barristers kowtowing to judges, said that barristers' constant braying of "as your lordship pleases" reflects total submission to a divine lordship. He adds, one cannot blame judges if they start believing in their own divinity. Indeed, I admire quite a few of them who have remained almost human, and I know at least one who's decidedly modest. M.K. Ramamurthy was one counsel who refused to acknowledge or foster any notions of judicial divinity or principle. He never said, "My lord." In fact, as an atheist, he did not recognize any kind of divinity. This reluctance led to some very awkward forms of address. I remember him arguing a case before Justice Dilip Kapoor, a delightful, childlike judge in the Delhi High Court. If the judge posed a question, Ramamurthy would say, apropos Justice Dilip Kapoor's question, after some time the bewildered judge asked, "Why do you keep referring to me in the third person?" I assume that at some stage of his career, Dilip Kapoor would have learned that this lawyer didn't believe in me-lording judges. Just let me know when I have 5 minutes left, okay? So the lawyers represented in this book are all gentlemen lawyers, as is this august company of gentlemen lawyers. I had the privilege of looking at the world of lawyers from a very different vantage point, from inside the belly of the beast. And from inside of the belly of the beast, lawyers appear slightly different, which is epitomized in this verse that I used to share with my fellow infates when I was inside. पैदा हुआ वकील तो शैतान ने कहा, पैदा हुआ वकील तो शैतान ने कहा, लो आज हम भी साहिबे औलाद हो गए। और एक दूसरा उसी तरस का है कि झूठ को सच बना दे ये है उनका कमाल, झूठ को सच बना दे ये है उनका कमाल, जेब खाली करें और कर दें बेहाल। और मुंसिफों जजेस के बारे में भी है, तो मुंसिफ का काम बस ये है इंसाफ बेच दे, तुम फीस दो वकील को वो बात बदल दे। So however oxymoronic it may appear, there are gentlemen lawyers. And this present book does a wonderful job in convincing us about it. I usually don't write what I have to speak, but this being a gathering of jurists and lawyers, I wanted to be exact in what I was saying. Therefore, in deference, I have written down. This book reminds us of the salient fact that law is a public service, and that is how, of course, lawyers became our founding fathers and led the freedom struggle. Gandhi, Jinnah, and Nehru were, of course, the most famous of them, but there were thousands of others. Raju's book reminds us of those figures and presents, inter alia, a social history of the legal profession after independence. There are vital details here about when the Supreme Court and the Delhi High Court came to be formed, how they began functioning. It gives us wonderful vignettes of Delhi down the ages, and at the same time builds linkages and connections that startle us. It should not be surprising, however, because Raju began his life aspiring to be a journalist. So he knows how to create portraits and write accounts. And that the book is also a history should also not be surprising, because, of course, all lives are also histories. In fact, the earliest novels, such as Tom Jones, described themselves as histories, the history of this poor foundling, as was Tristram Shandy, one of the earliest of novels. These novels purported to present biographies, which are, of course, another means of doing history, a genre that Mahatma Gandhi always preferred to novels and to histories proper as such. These model novels, biographies, or histories are, of course, vastly different from the intense focus on personal virtues that characterize the biographies produced in our past in the Indo-Islamic tradition. I speak of works like the Buddha Charit, the Harsh Charit, the Ram Charit, or even the Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia's account of Baba Farid, or the account written about him by his own disciples. Raju's book gives us both Charitra and Kal, combining the ancient and the modern. Every life is a story, of course, a story that reaches its resolution, its completion in death. The difference between life and fiction is that fiction presents us the resolution of each life, unlike the messiness and incompleteness that marks the living. In only writing about the dead, Raju has afforded himself narrative closure in the stories that he tells. Nevertheless, he writes life histories or narratives, while also dwelling on personal traits or idiosyncrasies. These short pen portraits or accounts would, in Urdu, be called khaka, and there is a long tradition of composing this. We only know about the last Dastan Go of Delhi, the great Mir Baqir Ali, because of two khakas, two pen portraits that were done on him. Manto, the great Urdu writer, has written some incredible khakas of Ashok Kumar, the actor Shyam, Akhtar Shirani, and several others. And it is this hoary tradition that Raju more properly follows. Raju is a collector of trivia, as he says, and it is that which makes these portraits exciting for me, because trivia and digressions are what make narratives. The superfluous, as Voltaire said, is a very necessary thing. With Barry Sen, for instance, we get the Delhi of the 1950s, the Maiden's Hotel, the Tonga ride to the Federal Court and Parliament House, the difficulty of getting a room in those days at the Imperial Hotel, and the housing shortage of Delhi in the 1950s. With Shamla Pappu, we learn about the singing competition of the 1940s and 50s, where she was once at a competition where Lata Mangeshkar herself was a candidate. There was, of course, Mr. Kakkar, who could recite Shakespeare and also loved Hindi poetry, much like the great and eccentric Urdu poet Firaq, who appears twice in this book, and with good reason. There is a lovely YouTube clip of Firaq Sahab reciting his verses to a room full of judges and advocates in the Allahabad High Court. And of course, Firaq Sahab's body being brought to his close friend R.K. Garg's house after he passed away at Ames. Dipankar Gupta learning to play the sitar along with Debu Chaudhary. Govind Swaminathan sending his daughter to Ibrahim Al-Qazi, which is a peak moment in Delhi cultural history after independence. As he said, he sent her to him to knock the theatrics out of her. This is Raju's phrase. Or Ramamurthy stopping at Sevanagar to buy vegetables while going to his house in Nitibagh. Raju builds up his narratives with great command and control. There is a dramatic introduction to Frank Antony, which begins with Raju's own birth and how he got to know his name. There's a lovely introduction to Shyamala Pappu with Lord Denning, a great British jurist, in describing her where she is and there she is and there she is. The introduction to Dipankar Gupta begins in the corridors of Supreme Court, where Raju is speaking about gentlemen lawyers in the past. He also knows how to build scenes, The PIL movement in India is mentioned and introduced through K.F. Rustamji and his police report about under trials languishing in jails in Bihar who should have been out on bail but are not on bail, and some of them are actually may still be there, as Justice Lokur would know. How Anthony Verghese faced B.G. Verghese in a suit, how Frank Antony faced B.G. Verghese in a suit when Verghese had declared that, the acquisition, the annexation of Sikkim was wrong in the newspaper and there was a strike against him. There's a lovely scene and confrontation there. Or and Frank Antony insisting on mispronouncing Jagan Mohan Reddy's name until the judge got exasperated and said that I might as well call you Mark Antony now. Or Justice Kakar confronting Justice Desai out, when he was bullying a young lawyer, and Mr. Kakar just stands up and confronts the judge to say, and the judge says, who are you appearing for? And he says, I'm appearing for the bar. And the judge is completely nonplussed, He also builds up his portraits with very fine small details, like Tehtuman leaving the IFS, and which he mentions in an aside that Mr. Sibal is also an IAS pass. And then it's a very roguish statement. Perhaps the hostility of many judges to bureaucrats arises from their being IAS fails. And then there are little moments that he picks up, when he meets Tehtuman, who's a very senior lawyer, and Raju is very junior, and Tehtuman gives him lunch, and during the course of that lunch, never once looks at his watch, although he's meeting somebody who's very junior and inconsequential to his world. Or Govind Mukherjee driving his canary yellow Citroen car and carrying on his shoulder a blue bag with initials GM, because in those days, junior counsel carried blue bags and seniors carried red bags. There is great drama in the book, which Raju captures with nuance and exactitude. The moment when Bari Sen actually converts to Christianity, it's a very poignant moment in a Kashmiri church. He's alone, he's caught in a crisis, and he saunters his way, he's unable to get out, and he enters a church, and he has been thinking and reading about Christianity, and in that moment, he just sits down and begins to pray, and that is when he becomes a Christian. And almost the Lord hears him, because soon after he finds a rescue plane which takes him out of Kashmir, which he wanted to do. I mean, of course, I just described to you Swaminathan's great marriage scene in Lahore, and Govinda Mukherjee and his Angreziyat, and the fact that he was at home quite a Bengali. Lal Narayan Sinha's great put down to R.K. Garg, saying to his judge, to the judgeship, my lordships, my vocal cords may not be as strong as my friends, but my arguments are as strong, and if you would only just listen to me, And Govinda Mukherjee being described in those days, which sounds very contemporary, as an impetuous Naxalite and a crypto-communist. And the last epithet that was used for him, which is now, I think, will be rare to find anymore, the typical Bengali armchair revolutionary. And then there is these sudden turns and developments, you know. For instance, Mr. Kakkar, who was supposed to take oath as the Attorney General, ends up taking an oath as the law minister. There's great friendships in the book and their snappings between Tarkunde and Chandrachud when the ADM Jabalpur judgment is given and Tarkunde is heartbroken. How could Justice Chandrachud give assent to that judgment? The falling out between Ramamurthy and Garg and how they would pass each other in the corridors but never even say hi to each other. The Justice R.S. Pathak and Kakkar and their seniority issues, because of which Mr. Kakkar never accepted a Supreme Court judgeship. Justice Venkatachalaya, who did not give senior advocate status to the Hingoranis, yet gave them a wonderful eulogy. Govind Swaminathan and his daughter's relationship, and in spite of their very different ideology and worldviews, the tribute that his daughter Srilata pays to him, who also went to Tihar, and Swaminathan's views on that. And there is great poignance, you know, Shyamlal losing out on her Solicitor General position, Raju watching Kapila Hingorani appear from the Chief Justice's chamber after learning that she had not been given a senior status, and so on. So there is great connections that come up in the book. There is Delhi, Calcutta, Allahabad, Mysore, of course, but there is also Nairobi, there is Jamia, there is Cardiff, there is S.C. Shahani Law College in Sindh, from which 3 of our protagonists have come. There is Justice Kamta Prasad, the father of Mr. Kakkar, the mayor of Allahabad, and of course a few years later the mayor of Allahabad is Motilal Nehru, and the two families have connections. And Motilal Nehru loses that election because, as Christopher Bailey informs us in his book, there was a campaign against Motilal Nehru in that election because he was alleged to be a beef eater. So, as they say in Punjabi, gal vichon gal nikaldi hai, and there is gal that leads to gal in Raju's book, which is how books should be, how digression should happen. I'm going to close. Before I close, there's a couple of things. Raju keeps talking about the Angrez type lawyers and the non-Angrez type lawyers, and actually reading this book made me reflect on that Angrez type personalities. And of course, you know, we fought against them, we disdained them. But today, from this vantage point, I'm actually forced to rethink about that Angreziyat and what it means, you know. And in some ways, what a wonderful thing it was, you know, because the things that it denoted, you know, the Angreziyat, punctuality, civility, wit, sang-froid, stiff upper lip, stoicism, manners, breeding, use of language, attachment to norms, correctness, rectitude, correctness of conduct, correctness of appearance, correctness of being. And we could do more with a little bit of Angreziyat in our public culture, I feel. There's a lovely quote attributed to Pascal, the philosopher. There's no one so poor as to not leave a story behind when they pass away. And these are rich life stories. And I could talk more, but I think my time has run out. So I'll stop here before concluding with this, that throughout the book, there is a running thread of the basic structure, because the 1973 hearings were what, when he went to attend those hearings, that is what convinced Raju that he should take up law as a profession. And in the course of time, many of those who opposed the basic structure doctrine changed their opinions. Veer Sai did, Raju himself has done, and we are today faced at a juncture where even die-hard opponents of basic structure are wondering, you know, which way they should go. क्योंकि हम जहाँ पहुँच गए हैं उसके बारे में फैज़ साहब बहुत साल पहले कह गए हैं कि बने हैं अहले हवस, मुद्दई भी, मुंसिफ भी, किसे वकील करें, किससे मुंसिफी चाहें. और ये उनकी बहुत मशहूर नज़म का हिस्सा है, तो उसके 4 लाइनें पढ़ के मैं छोड़ता हूँ. निसार मैं तेरी गलियों की ए वतन की जहाँ, चली है रस्म कि कोई ना सर उठा के चले. निसार मैं तेरी गलियों की ए वतन की जहाँ, चली है रस्म कि कोई ना सर उठा के चले. जो कोई चाहने वाला तवाफ को निकले, नज़र चुरा के चले, जिस्म जां बचा के चले। है अहले दिल के लिए अब ये नज़्म बस्त कुशाद, कि संग व खिश्त मुक़य्यद हैं और सग आज़ाद। बने हैं अहले हवस मुद्दई भी मुनसिफ भी, किसे वकील करें किससे मुनसिफी चाहें। थैंक यू वेरी मच राजू, थैंक यू।
Thank you very much, Mahmood, for that very brilliant narrative. And thank you very much to all the panelists for taking out time and, of course, not really taking out time, but, being on the panel and bringing to life all the various portraits which are there in this book. I would request Shibani now to just close the session. Thank you. Yes, you must have a photograph with Raju, is what Justice Lokur has connected.
Definitely. But before we break, Raju sir already is promising his next project. So I just wanted to tell our audience and our panelists that sir is already working on the next book, which is on the history of the Privy Council as the court of final resort for the British-ruled India for over 100 years. The book will trace the court's history through the great Indian cases before it, its Indian judges, and the Indian legal luminaries who appeared before it. So, sir, we're already looking forward to your next project. Thank you so much, everyone who joined us, our distinguished panelists, and also LiveLaw and Bar Bench for covering the event today. Thank you so much, everyone. Sir, please.
For reading the whole book,